In 1961, a teenage girl was forced to watch something no child should ever witness. Her father, one of country music's biggest stars, had just committed an unspeakable act. But this wasn't an isolated incident in country music's golden era. From domestic violence to attempted murder, these legendary performers kept dark secrets behind their public personas. Today, we uncover the cruel side of country music's brightest stars. Spade Cooley embodied the American dream in the 1940s. Rising from poverty in the Dust Bowls of Oklahoma, he transformed himself into the self-proclaimed king of Western swing. At his peak, he commanded astronomical fees of $10,000 per performance, equivalent to over $100,000 today. His weekly television show on KTLA drew millions of viewers, making him one of the most recognizable faces in entertainment. Movie contracts followed, and soon Cooley was starring in Western films, his charm and talent seemingly unstoppable. But behind the rhinestone suits and winning smile lurked a man consumed by jealousy and rage. His marriage to Ella Mae Evans, a former singer in his band, began to crumble as his fame grew. The relationship had started like a fairy tale, the band leader falling for his beautiful vocalist. But as Cooley's star rose, his personality darkened. He became increasingly paranoid, convinced his wife was having affairs with multiple men, including Roy Rogers. These suspicions, fueled by heavy drinking and mounting career pressure, turned their home into a battlefield. The violence escalated gradually but terrifyingly. First came the verbal abuse, then the beatings. Friends and band members noticed bruises on Ella Mae but stayed silent, fearing Cooley's influence in the industry. Ella Mae endured it all, hoping to protect their 3 children and maintain the family's public image. But on April 3, 1961, Cooley's rage reached a devastating breaking point. In their Willow Springs home, he brutally tortured Ella Mae for hours. The details of that evening were so disturbing that newspapers couldn't print most of them. Yet perhaps the cruelest act was forcing their 14-year-old daughter, Melody, to watch part of the aftermath. Warning her that this was what happened to adulterous women, Ella Mae died that night. The autopsy revealed she had suffered 465 cigarette burns, multiple broken bones, and severe internal injuries. Cooley's attempt to claim she had fallen in the shower quickly fell apart under police questioning. The trial that followed became a media sensation, with Melody's heartbreaking testimony serving as the final nail in her father's coffin. The king of Western swing was sentenced to life in prison. His vast fortune evaporated, spent on legal fees and lost opportunities. His television show was canceled, his films pulled from distribution, and his name became synonymous with brutality rather than musical innovation. After serving 8 years, Cooley was granted a 72-hour furlough to perform at a police benefit concert. In a twist of fate, he suffered a fatal heart attack backstage after receiving a standing ovation. His last words were reportedly, "I've always loved country music." While Spade Cooley's story ended with his death in 1969, another country legend's battle with inner demons would leave a trail of destruction throughout the industry. His name was familiar to every country music fan, but few knew the extent of his cruel behavior toward those closest to him. Hank Williams' name echoes through country music history as one of its greatest songwriters. His hits like "Your Cheatin' Heart" and "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry" painted vivid pictures of heartache. But the pain in his songs wasn't just artistic expression, it reflected a troubled man who inflicted misery on everyone around him. Williams' cruel streak emerged early in his career. His relationship with first wife Audrey was a battlefield of emotional abuse and public humiliation. During performances, he would often mock her singing abilities from the stage, deliberately setting her up for failure. Band members recalled instances where he would force Audrey to perform, knowing the crowd would react negatively, just to prove his point about her lack of talent. His drinking turned him from a charismatic performer into an unpredictable terror. Williams would regularly fire band members without warning or cause, leaving them stranded in unfamiliar towns with no way home. One musician recalled being abandoned in Kansas City at 2 a.m. because he questioned Williams's choice of song order. These weren't just drunken mishaps, they were calculated acts of cruelty that destroyed careers and friendships. The abuse wasn't limited to his inner circle. Williams gained a reputation for taking advance payments for shows, then simply not showing up. In 1952 alone, he missed 26 scheduled performances, leaving venue owners in financial ruin and fans waiting for hours. When confronted about these no-shows, he would often respond with threats of violence. His treatment of his son, Hank Jr., was particularly harsh. Despite knowing his health was failing due to alcohol and prescription drug abuse, Williams made no provisions for his child's future. He drained his finances on extended benders, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises. In one particularly cruel episode, He promised to attend his son's birthday party, only to be found passed out in a hotel room 2 states away. Even his mother, Lily, wasn't spared from his rage. After she attempted to intervene in his destructive behavior, Williams publicly denounced her, claiming she was only interested in his money. He blocked her access to his home and refused to let her see her grandson, maintaining this cruel separation until his death. While Hank Williams's cruelty stemmed from his personal demons, our next artist's calculated acts of sabotage showed a different kind of darkness. His smooth voice and charming smile masked a man who took pleasure in destroying other performers' careers, including a young hopeful named Willie Nelson. Lefty Frizzle revolutionized country music with his distinctive vocal style that influenced everyone from George Jones to Merle Haggard. But beneath his smooth vocals and charismatic stage presence lurked a ruthless operator who delighted in crushing other artists' dreams. Unlike other stars whose cruelty erupted in drunken outbursts, Frizzle's approach was coldly calculated. He systematically targeted rising talents he viewed as threats, using his industry connections to sabotage their careers. His preferred method was spreading vicious rumors about artists' personal lives and professional reliability. These weren't casual gossip. They were carefully crafted lies designed to make venue owners and record labels nervous about investing in new talent. Willie Nelson became one of his prime targets in the early 1950s. When Nelson was just starting out, Frizzell learned the young songwriter was being considered for a major recording contract. Within weeks, key industry figures mysteriously heard stories about Nelson being unreliable, difficult to work with, and having a drug problem, none of which was true. The campaign was so effective that Nelson struggled to book shows in Texas for nearly 2 years. Frizzell's cruelty extended to his own band members. He would intentionally hire promising musicians, not to utilize their talents, but to keep them from working with potential rivals. One guitarist spent 8 months on payroll without ever being allowed to perform. When the frustrated musician finally quit, Frizzell blacklisted him across the Texas music scene. His most devastating tactics involved sabotaging live performances. He would send friends to unplug equipment during rivals' shows or start fights in the audience. In one notorious incident, he paid a group of hecklers to disrupt an up-and-coming singer's showcase performance in front of major label executives. The young artist never recovered from the humiliation and quit music entirely. The industry eventually caught on to Frizzell's schemes. By the late 1950s, his reputation for sabotage had grown so toxic that other performers refused to share bills with him. Record labels became wary of his behavior, and his own career began to suffer. The man who had once commanded respect through fear found himself increasingly isolated, watching as many of the artists he tried to destroy went on to surpass his success. While Lefty Frizzell waged his silent war of sabotage, another country star took a more direct approach to cruelty. His violent outbursts weren't carefully planned. They were explosive acts that often ended in bloodshed. Johnny Paycheck gave us "Take This Job and Shove It," but his real legacy was a string of violent confrontations that terrorized Nashville's music scene. His reputation wasn't built on rumors or secondhand stories. It was documented in police reports, court transcripts, and hospital records. On a cold December night in 1985 at the North High Lounge in Hillsboro, Ohio, Paycheck demonstrated just how dangerous he could be. After a heated argument with patron Larry Wise about the merits of turtle soup versus deer meat, Paycheck pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and shot the man in the head. Miraculously, Wise survived. Paycheck's defense? He claimed he was too drunk to remember pulling the trigger. But this wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the 1970s, Paycheck had developed a pattern of settling minor disagreements with major violence. In one Nashville bar, he stabbed a man for accidentally bumping into him. At a recording studio, he threatened a sound engineer with a broken bottle because the mix wasn't country enough. His own band members traveled with a separate vehicle, fearing his unpredictable rages on tour buses. Record producers learned to schedule his studio time during morning hours when he was least likely to be drunk. Even then, sessions often ended in violence. One engineer recalled Paycheck destroying $15,000 worth of equipment because he didn't like how his voice sounded on playback. The incident left 3 people injured and resulted in another arrest. His reputation became so notorious that venues started requiring extra security deposits just to book him. These weren't for potential property damage. They were to cover potential medical expenses for staff and customers. Some insurance companies even specifically excluded Paycheck-related incidents from their coverage of music venues. The shooting in Hillsborough finally caught up with him. Despite hiring expensive lawyers and claiming self-defense, Paycheck was sentenced to 7 years in prison. He served 2 years before being pardoned, but the time behind bars did little to temper his violent tendencies. After his release, he was involved in 3 more assault cases before promoters stopped booking him altogether. Paycheck's violent outbursts might have been shocking, but they weren't as destructive as our next artist's calculated cruelty. While Paycheck hurt strangers in bars, this next legend's targets were much closer to home, including the woman who would become country music's biggest female star. George Jones's velvet voice earned him the nickname the Possum, but his actions earned him a darker reputation. His cruel streak didn't just destroy relationships, it nearly destroyed country music's most iconic duo when he targeted his wife, Tammy Wynette. Their marriage became a battlefield where Jones wielded his wealth and influence like weapons. When Wynette would book performances without his approval, Jones would ensure venues mysteriously lost their liquor licenses days before her shows. He hired private investigators to follow her, then deliberately started rumors about affairs that never happened, tarnishing her reputation among country music's conservative fan base. But his most devastating acts of cruelty came during his infamous disappearing acts. Jones wouldn't just miss shows, he orchestrated elaborate schemes to maximize the damage. He would wait until venues had sold out of tickets, then vanish, leaving promoters to face angry crowds. These weren't simple no-shows. He would sometimes appear briefly backstage, let everyone see him, then disappear just before showtime, ensuring no one could claim he hadn't shown up. His band members suffered particular hardship. Jones would regularly abandon them in remote locations without pay or transportation. One notorious incident saw him leave his entire crew stranded in Kansas during winter, their hotel reservations canceled, and their equipment locked in a truck he had taken. When they finally made it back to Nashville 2 weeks later, he claimed they had abandoned him and refused to pay their wages. The worst of his behavior was reserved for those closest to him. During his marriage to Wynette, he would deliberately sabotage her medication for her medical conditions, replacing pain pills with sugar tablets, then watch her suffer through performances. He justified this cruelty by claiming she sang better when she hurt. Even his own children weren't spared. Jones would promise to attend their important events, let them wait for hours, then call with elaborate excuses. One Christmas, he had his daughter's gifts delivered to the house, then had them retrieved and returned before she could open them, all because her mother had allowed her to spend time with her stepfather. While George Jones's cruelty stemmed from personal demons and jealousy, our next artist's ruthless behavior was driven by pure ambition. His rise to outlaw country stardom left a trail of broken careers and shattered lives, all sacrificed on the altar of his uncompromising vision. Waylon Jennings might have helped create the outlaw country movement, but his real outlaw behavior happened behind closed doors. As one of his former managers stated, Waylon didn't just break the rules, he broke the people who made them. His rise to fame became a masterclass in ruthless ambition. In 1972, when RCA Records partnered him with a promising young producer, Jennings spent 3 months systematically undermining the man's confidence. He would approve recordings, wait for them to be finalized, then demand everything be redone, costing the label thousands. The producer eventually had a nervous breakdown and left the music industry entirely. The legendary outlaw recording contract he secured wasn't just about artistic freedom, it came at the cost of dozens of careers. Jennings would identify key employees at his record label, befriend them, then use their confidential information to blackmail executives. One secretary lost her job after 15 years because Jennings threatened to expose the label's creative accounting practices she had revealed to him. His band members faced constant psychological warfare. Jennings would hire talented musicians specifically to keep them from working with potential rivals. He'd promise them creative input, then systematically shoot down every suggestion until they quit in frustration. Those who stayed faced his notorious reliability tests, deliberate schedule changes made without notice, just to prove their loyalty. Even his closest friends weren't safe from his ambition. When fellow artist Tommy Collins needed help during a financial crisis, Jennings offered to buy his song catalog. The price he offered was a fraction of its worth, and he knew Collins was desperate. After acquiring the rights, Jennings refused to let Collins perform his own songs at shows, effectively ending his career. Perhaps most calculating was his treatment of young songwriters. Jennings would deliberately cultivate relationships with promising writers, encourage them to share their unpublished work, then register similar songs, just different enough to avoid legal issues. One songwriter recalled showing Jennings a deeply personal ballad about his father, only to hear a suspiciously similar Jennings song on the radio 3 months later. Jennings's calculated cruelty was business, cold and professional. But our next artist's controlling behavior crossed into something far more personal, targeting a young talent who would eventually become the biggest star in country music history. Porter Wagoner's rhinestone suit sparkled under stage lights, but his relationship with Dolly Parton revealed a darkness that television cameras never captured. What began as a career-making opportunity for a young singer turned into a 7-year nightmare of control and manipulation. When Wagoner brought 21-year-old Dolly Parton onto his show in 1967, he initially played the role of mentor, but mentorship quickly turned to ownership. He created a web of financial obligations that kept Parton bound to him, including contracts that gave him control over her publishing rights and personal appearances. When she tried to choose her own songs, Wagoner would threaten to stop paying her band members. His controlling behavior extended beyond the business realm. Wagoner dictated Parton's appearance, stage movements, and even her personal relationships. He hired private investigators to follow her and installed informants among her friends. Band members recalled instances where he would force Parton to repeat performances dozens of times during rehearsals, berating her until she was in tears. The financial manipulation was particularly cruel. While Parton's songs were becoming hits, Wagoner structured her contracts so that she received minimal royalties. He would promise to renegotiate better terms, then use her family's financial needs against her, reminding her how many relatives depended on her income. When she tried to book independent shows, he would call venues and threaten to blacklist them. Wagoner's possessiveness turned dangerous when Parton's solo career began to eclipse his own. He would sabotage her equipment before performances, claim she was ill to cancel her appearances, and spread rumors about her being difficult to work with. During one infamous incident, he locked her in his office for hours when she mentioned wanting to explore opportunities beyond his show. The breaking point came when Parton discovered Wagoner had been registering copyrights on songs she wrote alone, claiming co-writing credits he hadn't earned. Her response was both professional and cutting. She wrote "I Will Always Love You" as her resignation letter, turned it into a hit, and finally broke free from his control. While Wagoner's cruelty was hidden behind rhinestones and smiles, our next artist flaunted his brutal behavior like a badge of honor. His offstage antics would make even the most hardened outlaws uncomfortable, and his treatment of fans became legendary for all the wrong reasons. Allen Coe didn't just embrace the outlaw image, he weaponized it. Unlike his contemporaries who created personas for the stage, Coe's cruelty was raw and intentional, often targeting the very fans who supported his career. His live shows became infamous for their unpredictability, not because of artistic spontaneity, but calculated humiliation. Coe would single out audience members for public mockery, often targeting physical appearances or disabilities. At a 1978 concert in Texas, he spent 45 minutes berating a wheelchair-bound fan until the person had to be helped out of the venue. Rather than apologize, Coe incorporated the incident into his next show as a comedy bit. Beyond the stage, Coe's interaction with industry professionals revealed an even darker pattern. He would deliberately hire inexperienced roadies, promise them training, then abandon them in remote locations as road lessons. Several young crew members found themselves stranded hundreds of miles from home, their wages unpaid and their possessions still locked in Coe's tour vehicles. His recording sessions became dreaded events in Nashville studios. Coe would demand engineers work excessive hours, then refuse to pay them, claiming their work was substandard. He once locked a producer in a studio booth for 6 hours because he disagreed with a mixing decision. The producer later discovered Coe had also slashed his car tires as a reminder about artistic integrity. Women in the industry faced particularly harsh treatment. Coe would invite female songwriters to collaborate, then claim full credit for their work. If they protested, he would threaten to spread rumors about their personal lives. Several promising careers ended before they began due to his intimidation tactics. Even his charitable appearances masked cruel intentions. Coe would agree to benefit concerts, wait until tickets sold out, then demand payment, knowing organizers couldn't refuse without disappointing attendees. One children's hospital lost thousands of dollars when Coe forced them to pay his full performance fee for what had been advertised as a free benefit show. While Coe's cruelty was brazenly public, our next legend's controversial behavior went far beyond the boundaries of decency, leading to one of country music's biggest scandals and a fall from grace that shocked the nation. Jerry Lee Lewis earned his nickname The Killer on stage, but his real-life actions proved far more devastating than his piano-pounding performances. His most notorious act sent shockwaves through the entertainment world that would forever tarnish his legacy. In 1957, at the peak of his crossover success, Lewis orchestrated what many consider country music's most disturbing scandal. He married Myra Gale Brown, his 13-year-old first cousin once removed, while still legally married to his previous wife. The cruelest aspect wasn't just the marriage itself, but his calculated attempt to hide it. He created fake documents, lied to the press, and forced Myra to maintain elaborate deceptions about her age. When the truth emerged during his British tour, Lewis didn't protect his child bride from the media firestorm. Instead, he pushed her into press conferences, making her defend their relationship while he watched from the sidelines. Myra later revealed that Lewis would coach her on what to say, threatening consequences if she deviated from his script. His cruelty extended beyond his marriages. Lewis weaponized his popularity to torture up-and-coming artists. He would invite promising performers to open for him, then deliberately extend his sound checks until minutes before showtime, leaving them no time to prepare. If they complained, he would send his road crew to sabotage their equipment during performances. The recording studio became another venue for his sadistic behavior. Lewis would invite session musicians to record, keep them waiting for days without pay, then dismiss them without recording a note. He claimed it was to teach them patience, but studio owners reported he would watch their growing desperation with amusement. Even his own family wasn't safe. When his son Jerry Lee Lewis Jr. began showing musical talent, Lewis Sr. would publicly humiliate him during performances, forcing him to attempt complex piano pieces, then mocking his failures. The psychological abuse continued until his son's tragic death in 1973. While Jerry Lee Lewis's cruelty often made headlines, our final artist preferred to operate in the shadows, using his influence to systematically destroy careers of those who dared to challenge his authority in country music. Marty Robbins gave us El Paso, but behind his storytelling talents lay a man who wrote darker narratives in real life. While other artists displayed their cruelty openly, Robbins perfected the art of career assassination. His weapon of choice was the radio industry. Using his influence with station owners, Robbins created an elaborate blacklisting system. Artists who crossed him would suddenly find their songs mysteriously dropped from playlists across multiple states. One promising singer lost airplay in 47 stations overnight after refusing to give Robbins a writing credit on his original song. Robbins particularly targeted artists who shared his Western music style. When fellow Western balladeer Johnny Western gained traction with television theme songs, Robbins launched a whisper campaign suggesting Western was anti-television. Within months, Western's TV contracts mysteriously disappeared. The crusade only ended when Western agreed to publicly credit Robbins as an influence on his style. His recording sessions became infamous for psychological warfare. Robbins would invite competing artists to collaborate, then systematically undermine their confidence. He'd demand countless retakes, point out minor flaws, and eventually shelve the recordings entirely. One artist spent 3 months recording with Robbins, only to discover the sessions had never been recorded. The studio time was merely a ploy to keep him from working elsewhere. Even his own band members faced constant manipulation. Robbins would hire talented musicians, not for their skills, but to prevent them from working with potential rivals. He kept multiple steel guitar players on payroll, rotating them randomly to create a climate of insecurity. Those who quit found themselves blacklisted across Nashville. His final act of cruelty came posthumously. Robbins left specific instructions in his will to block certain artists from recording his songs, ensuring his influence would continue to destroy careers even after his death. Several musicians discovered their tribute albums blocked from release by these provisions, their investments lost to Robbins' last act of revenge. These 10 artists shaped country music's golden era, but their legacies carry dark shadows. Their songs may have touched millions, but their actions wounded countless lives. Perhaps the cruelest truth is that their talent and fame allowed them to inflict pain that would have landed lesser-known individuals behind bars.